So girls, you could be asked to look at the presentation of the article in question 2 or indeed question 3. So that's what this presentation is about. So there's loads of guidance online, loads of lists and things like that that will help you get to grips with what obvious features of presentation are used in the articles. Remember, for a higher tier paper, they're probably more likely to go for a leaflet or a website that uses presentational devices quite subtly. The most important piece of advice I would say is, yes, look for these things, but don't just feature spot. You must not come out with "this adds impact." You must be very specific about what kind of impact it's trying to achieve. So putting yourself into the mindset of the writer and the creator of the article is essential, and your comments, even though you may spot a logo, it's only necessary to mention the logo if it's of relevance to the question, and if the question is to do with, persuasive features. For example, here a logo is a high level of trust in a product, creates a high level of trust in a product, so you're more likely to be asked about persuasive features in a website or a non-fiction article that has a logo. I talk about a blended approach to looking at the language. You're never going to be asked about presentation on its own. It's always going to be with another word like tone or language. So, the bullet points or the capitalization or the change of font style is probably linked to the language in itself. So you don't need to separate presentation from language or write it in two different paragraphs. I would suggest a blended approach. Again, another example of this is when you're looking at a slogan or when you're looking at a caption, look at the language of that caption or slogan as well, and therefore you're hitting both question words at the same time. When you're in the test, it's really important that you ask yourself questions. Why is that headline here? What is this subheading actually suggesting? If the alliteration is used, what is it? How does it link in with what's in the main body of the text? How does the photograph reinforce or underline or accentuate something in the main body of the article? Of course, even with presentational features, you're making your point, you're giving your example or your evidence, and the most important thing is that you are explaining the presentation features. Again, I've just pulled together things that are in files and in notes. Just read over all these things. There's no need to learn them off by heart, but it's just about reading over and being confident with what you're looking for. So folks, this is the examiner's report. And as you can see here, it is about making sure that there's a good balance between the presentational features and the language. And I suppose especially for the higher tier, you're going beyond description of them. You're actually trying to link it to the text. Okay, look at the language used here. The article, the picture illustrates the beautiful animal that is under threat, and this image is kept in the reader's mind as they digest the statistics which expose the plight. Quotation of facts and statistics was a popular way into the response. The best answers showing time had been taken to consider what was in this information that supported the argument. The redundant, generic point that it shows they know what they are talking about is still with us, but becoming less frequent. You've got to be, when you're quoting a fact or a statistic, it has a very specific purpose. So the key word from the examiner's report is always this one. They hate generic responses. So the guidance and the information that I've put on the previous slides for you, I would say read over them. Don't learn them off by heart. Now, this is the most difficult part of the of the analysis of presentation, because there will be the obvious presentational features, but then there's something called the presentation of the argument, which really looks at how the text is structured. And this is definitely a feature of a high band answer. Let me show you in more detail. Sorry, just before I do, can I mention your analysis of the photographs? Look at the high level analysis that they are expecting when analysing a photograph. Take a look at the high level analysis they're looking for when they are asking you to analyse the subheadings. They're looking for the juxtapositioning of the subheadings, the structural support that the subheadings use. They're looking at how it's linked with one or more aspects of the text. So this whole idea of linking to the text, reinforcing what is in some aspect of the main body of the text, that's how you get higher level marks when analysing photographs. So this is what I mean when I talk about pointing out a subheading, but then going on to closely analyse it. This is what I would call a blended approach. Again here, this pupil is looking at the structure of the end of the text, but they're also going on to analyse the language and the final point that the writer is making with very specific reference to the question. Again, just another example of showing you this blended approach. Okay, looking at the openings, looking at the headings, which is hitting the structure, but then also looking at the language analysis too and the creation of humour, which is, and again, using the key word of the question, thought-provoking, to reinforce and always keep it relevant. So just to recap then, obviously you're going to look for the obvious features of presentation, the pictures, the subheadings, all of those things. In terms of the harder, more critical analysis of the structure of the text, even if you can think, how does the article open? Look at the way that it begins. Trace how it develops, trace the middle bit. How does it move from one point to the next to the next? And obviously look at the way the article ends. How would you describe the approach taken to the end of the article? Think about it like a flow chart. If you were putting yourself into the mind of the writer of this article and actually going back to the planning stages, how do you imagine the writer would have written out the plan for this article? How does it begin? How does it develop? And then how does it end? My last piece of advice is not to labour it. If it's not there, don't worry about it. Go on ahead and look for the aspects of the language or the tone that are there. And again, I would talk about this blended approach. It's not a 50-50 split. You don't have to write 50% on the structure, 50% on the language. So take a blended approach, use your common sense, and if you feel that you're forcing it, well then chances are that you are forcing it, so stop and move on to a more valid and easier analysed point.